whether it's Enron or Elizabeth Holmes or FTX, you're telling me there's nobody in the room that has the moral courage to say, "Excuse me, wait a second." You know, so I read today somebody lost $2 million, their life savings on FTX. Is there nobody in the room who's going to stand up and say, "Stop, this is wrong"?
Cash flow. Cash flow. Did you clear your cash flow?
All right, Rich, thanks for coming on today. We worked together, I don't know how many years ago when my company, Curotech, was a vendor at Audience Partners. I think that was back in like 2016 or 2015. So since then, I've seen you're part of multiple other companies. You've sold Audience Partners to Altice. I just checked; they have like a $1.88 billion market cap, down 10x from last year since kind of stock highs in 2021. And you've got a bunch of other companies as well that you've got irons in the fire with. I'd love to just kind of dive into some of that. Any particular place you want to start?
No, I'm in a 12-step program to stop starting companies, and I'm not doing very well in my recovery. So we can start where you like.
Cool. Yeah, let's do Audience Partners. I think that's where our interaction started. And so let's start there. If you can kind of give me just like what was the original inspiration for it. I think you and Jeff started it together, right?
Yeah, my partner Jeff Ditas. We started it as Campaign Grid, and in roughly 2007, I was asked to run for Congress, and I considered it briefly. What the RNC, NRCC wanted me to do was write a $5 million check for my own campaign, but because of redistricting and gerrymandering, I was outgunned 2-1 Democrat registered voters to Republican registered voters. So they really wanted me to be a sacrificial lamb. And I was flattered to be asked, but I thought there might be a better use of those funds. And I went to the RNC and said, I'd like to put together an advertising network, a political ad network, to target voters by registration. So, one ad gets shown to a Republican, a different ad gets shown to a Democrat. And the other thing at the time is that you could buy advertising based on zip codes or states, but you couldn't buy it by congressional district. And so what Jeff and I did was we mapped the country into congressional districts and then entered into an agreement with the RNC, the Republican National Committee, to use their voter file and match it to online profiles from folks like Amazon and others, dropping cookies to indicate if you were a right or a left leaning voter. Now, there's a rather famous company out of Britain. Excuse me. It's escaping me. We have to come back to it. But they got in trouble for doing what we did. Cambridge Analytica was the name
Oh,
of
yeah.
it. And they got in trouble for two reasons.
Well, they got in trouble for the Facebook thing, right? Because they were doing all the quizzes or whatever, and then exporting all the data out of the Open Graph on Facebook.
Yeah. So they were basically stealing that data using an app. And they also had taken money from the Russians, is my recollection. And so, we did neither of those things. We, were homegrown and certainly didn't take any Russian money. And rather than steal the information from Facebook, we just paid Facebook to reach those audiences. So it was the first time that anybody was able to target voters that way. And we secured a patent for targeting voters on desktop, mobile devices, and later on television. So those patents were sold to Altice when we sold the company. And then Campaign Grid, people noticed what we had done by taking these offline databases, specifically voter databases, and matching them online. So we expanded into other verticals like healthcare, et cetera. We were part of the Obamacare rollout by identifying likely customers who were uninsured. So it was quite a ride. I think we did that for from 7 to 15. So it was an 8-year run.
Wow, that's awesome. So, a couple things you touched on. Obviously, the landscape's changed, and cookies are kind of out the door now. So, curious how you've seen the ad space evolving there. But then another point you mentioned was about how you guys were the first on the scene to do the kind of by voter registration district or by registered party, where people are registered. You were the first to be able to serve users content ads specifically based on those two criteria. Has Google or Facebook or any of the other major ad platforms or ad networks since added that functionality, or were you guys still one of the, I guess Altice now one of the only doing it?
No, I think the entire digital ad landscape migrated into using either our technology or similar technologies. And, I have very mixed emotions over it because, on the one hand, it was very successful. It was a financial win for myself, Jeff, and all the employees. On the other hand, I do think it contributes to the polarization
Mm.
that we see in our politics. There's a book out called The Filter Bubble. And, what's happened is people are being only exposed to the information that coincides with their beliefs. And so this filter bubble creates a vacuum. And, the people who are watching Fox News never get the perspective of a MSNBC viewer and vice versa. So I think that's really contributed to the polarization in the political landscape. And for that, I feel badly.
I mean, I checked out before we got reconnected here. I checked out like some of your tweets and LinkedIn posts, and I think you're a pretty like middle of the road kind of guy. Like you think for yourself, and you are open to both perspectives and forming your own opinion. And I guess a lot of people, I don't want to generalize, but I think some people don't do that. Like not any particular group of people, but just some individuals, regardless of who they are, where they're from, whatever, just don't form their own opinions and kind of are more susceptible than others to media and to kind of falling into one of these algorithmic wormholes. But I think Facebook is probably the worst of all of them for polarizing people, creating that polarization of masses. Would you agree with that?
I might agree with it. I think I have more exposure to Facebook and their algorithms than some of the other social media platforms. I think, I'd like to think that the vast majority of Americans are patriotic, of moderate beliefs. But the reality is, in the world, the media, the way it exists right now, it really lends itself to the extremists on both ends. And I can tell you, for example, having worked on literally thousands of campaigns, that it's almost impossible for a middle of the road candidate to raise money online, but the bomb throwers on the left and the right can be very successful raising money online. So I think there's a distorted view caused by the filter bubble that the only people are online are extremists. It's not the case. It's just that the silent majority, as they used to call it during the Nixon administration, really isn't heard and is not engaged in bomb throwing. But I may be romanticizing this, but I think that's the vast majority of Americans. And
I'd see that the silent majority. I see that as being a thing because I don't really know anyone who's. I have a few people I know that family members or whatever that are extreme on one end or the other. But if you look at the people I know in my life, the people I work with, or friends and friends of friends and that sort of thing, I don't really know anybody that's super extreme, and most people are pretty reasonable, somewhere in that kind of like silent majority. But that the 10% on both ends of the spectrum are the ones that everyone hears because they're the loudest.
Yeah, and there's no shared experience anymore. It's not like 40 or 50 years ago when Walter Cronkite was on the news at 6 o'clock and with 3 channels to choose from. with the explosion of media options and choices and editorial decisions, you might experience this with your own company. How many times do you get to the office and stand around the water cooler and everybody's talking about one show that was on last night? It's really not, with streaming and everything else. It's not that common anymore. So I think the world, I don't know if the polarization of our politics created the media environment or vice versa, but they are codependent.
Yeah, interesting. And it's really interesting because I know you were in the, as you said, you were in that political ad space world. So it's really interesting to hear your perspective on that. So I've been seeing some really interesting ad platforms coming out lately. I don't know specifically. I can't name names off the top of my head. Or there was that one roll up that went public. They're now the largest. Magnite, I think was are you familiar with Magnite?
Just vaguely. I think that the my perspective of the evolution of the ad tech world, from the time that we started in 2007, there was a lot of innovation. There was a lot of new technology that was required. And I think that by and large, the ad tech space has been commoditized now.
Yeah.
The spread between like the bid and the ask in programmatic ads advertising is still far too large. When you think about the trading of an ad unit, it really shouldn't be that much more expensive than trading a unit of stock. So if you can sell a share of General Motors or IBM for $1, it shouldn't cost you 30-40% to trade ad impressions. But those kinds of gross margins are eaten up by all of the middlemen, the people that are matching cookies to IDs. And by the way, you said cookies were going away. It's like that joke, the rumors of my death have been exaggerated. Google keeps pushing out the deadline for sunset cookies. And in the absence of cookies, there are other identity graphs. One of them that we helped invent was IP targeting. So we could take the individual IP address and use that to profile folks. But in terms of the ad tech landscape, it's largely been commoditized, and I think is ripe for more innovation. I think the big, the big things that have happened since I sold to Altice, certainly the emergence of TikTok is fascinating, and the other trend that escaped me is the influencer network. I mean, there's literally children making millions of dollars and opening up toys, and there are influencers in every category, and it's just a fascinating explosion of new media that was nowhere to be found in 2000, 2007. I am not familiar with the infrastructure that supports those influencers, but it's really fascinating to me.
Yeah, TikTok's really interesting. We're actually so the way that one of the things we do with the Cash Flow podcast is obviously we have the full episode content that gets distributed out to all of the podcast platforms, and then we put it on YouTube as well with the video content. Then we have segments and clips. So the segments are like individual 5 to 15 minute sections of one topic, like one focused on one topic, not multiple things like the episode. Yeah. And then we pull the clips that are like 30 seconds or 10, 20, 30, 40-second clips. And we haven't moved into TikTok yet. I want to master the YouTube Shorts strategy first, so we can drive traffic to the YouTube episodes. But TikTok is like, it's like a rocket. Once you figure that out, you figure out how to put the jet fuel in. That thing is a pretty wild engine, and it's amazing too. Just people. It's such a sticky app. You can just sit there and like flip through videos and find yourself stuck on the platform for like an hour, and it's like literally taking social media crack to the next level.
Yeah. the mouse that keeps hitting the lever. Give me
Yeah.
more.
I heard it's someone said recently it's like the smartest minds of our generation are being employed by like these big tech companies to make sure you spend an extra 2 minutes per day on their platform.
Well, it's very interesting that you say that because earlier we were talking about the programmatic ad space and the ad space in general. And, it's still largely void of any real regulation. So, in many respects, you could have, you're seeing quants, for example, who would otherwise go to Wall Street and apply their skills to trading stocks. And instead, they move into social media or ad tech, where, it's the wild, wild west. There are no rules. Years ago, one of my patented plays was I would buy out all of the available inventory, say on Fox News the day before election day, and I would do that 9 months in advance because politicians don't have any money until usually around Labor Day. Fox News and the other publishers would love to get the insertion order. So, I would buy it for next to nothing. And then I would sit on it for 6 months at no cost whatsoever. And it would go from maybe $3 per thousand to $30 per thousand as it got closer to election day, giving me this great arbitrage. And I still didn't even have to pay Fox News or the publishers for 30 days until 30 days after the ad impressions ran.
Wow.
So basically a 7-month option for free. If you did that on Wall Street, if you get a 7-month option with no financial commitment on IBM or Microsoft, you'd go to jail. It's not permitted.
Why does Fox News do that? I mean, don't they see that? Don't they understand that cycle, the buying cycle, and just wait to sell it for more? Or why would they do that?
You would think that would be the case, but very often these companies have changes in sales management, and every sales guy is trying to make his quota for the quarter.
Yeah, I get it.
So if you put your insertion order in at the end of the first quarter, even though it's a third or fourth quarter buy, they're going to take it. It helps.
I think that's the failings of like big corporate too. It's like everything's quarter by quarter, and there's no long-term vision. Like you can't see out on the horizon. You're just trying to make your quota that quarter.
It's a great thing to exploit. And I shudder to think what a hedge fund guy would do. I'm just a humble ed tech guy.
Well, if you do the hedge fund, you can lever it up like 30 times or something somehow.
Yeah. or call SBF and do it all with.
I saw your LinkedIn post with what's her name, Theranos, Elizabeth Holmes, and Sam Bankman-Fried, like on the cover of Forbes, and you didn't even write anything; you just posted the images.
Yeah, it's a fascinating. It's fascinating for me to watch this because the entrepreneurial community puts these folks on a pedestal, whether it's entrepreneurs or VCs, what have you, or certainly the business media. Elizabeth Holmes, front page of Forbes, and SBF, front page of Forbes, only to find out, that they're complete and absolute frauds. And along the way, I think what's happened is it infects younger entrepreneurs who are out there, playing the fake it till you make it game, because that's who their quote unquote heroes see. They're not as the entrepreneurs that are coming up, maybe even those watching this podcast, they're not presented with the lunch bucket guy who's really working his butt off. Frankly, somebody like you, I'm not trying to blow smoke, but you've been at it for a whole lot of years now. You're up to 100 or more employees all around the world. Frankly, you should be celebrated, not the guy or the gal who closed the $10 million round and still has no revenue. And, I would really like to see the pendulum swing back to real reality, not Kardashian entrepreneurs. And certainly, they've been very financially successful. But what I mean is the fake entrepreneur nonsense.
Well, the pie in the sky venture market seems to be a little bit on hold right now. Companies that were raising at like, ridiculous, like 20x future projected revenue, top line future projected revenue. They're not getting that anymore.
Yeah, but you know what? In my entrepreneurial career, and arguably, I'm a beneficiary. I was very lucky to be in the first .com with US Interactive. This is the third cycle I've seen of this. I've seen extraordinary valuations in private equity and venture capital, certainly in the .com boom up until 1999, and really that collapsed in with MicroStrategy in January or February of 2000. And then it happened again in 2007. And we had a downturn that corrected valuations in 2008. And now it's unraveling again. So it seems it's on like an 8-10 year cycle, where the balloon gets blown up and then it gets popped. So
MicroStrategy is interesting. What's that guy? The CEO. He's like the Bitcoin guy now.
yeah, he's a crypto Bitcoin guy.
Yeah, Michael Saylor.
Yeah, Michael Saylor. He's a believer. I'm not a crypto investor, and I don't necessarily believe it. It might just be because I'm a boomer. Something like to remind me of that. And he doesn't mean it as an affectionate term.
So Michael Saylor, though, MicroStrategies, was that I wasn't on the scene. I'm closer probably to your son's age than your age, but was MicroStrategies kind of like what kicked off that collapse in the .com era?
In 2000, that was the canary in the coal mine. And it unraveled really quickly after they had this blown out missed earnings.
Wow.
Now, interestingly enough, and this might just be coincidence, but I've started all my successful internet businesses in recessions.
I don't think it's coincidence. It's like, the concept of having wines minted in a certain, vintages of wine in a certain year, like the conditions were great, like the weather and the sun, the clouds were right and the grapes, whatever. During recessions, you've got access to the cheapest talent, and it's the hardest to raise money and it's the hardest to acquire customers. So you better have like a good business model. And if you do, then you've got the best talent, access to the best and cheapest talent. So when you come out of that 2-3 years later and your business is solid, you just take off while everyone else is trying to catch up.
Yeah. It's, I think the first couple businesses that I started, it might have been by accident. I can tell you quite specifically that starting Campaign Grid / Audience Partners in 2007, I distinctly made the decision to go into the political realm, because I was asked to run and there was no incumbent that was being smart about political advertising. But B, I said, if the clouds are gathering economically, I want to be a Beltway bandit, because in good times and bad times, Washington, D.C. knows how to spend. So I can say that I definitively did it in 2007, 2008 because of economic conditions.
Yeah, that's smart. So you mentioned when we were before we hit record, you mentioned you're getting the band back together on Audience Partners.
Yeah, I've had a few people reach out to me, and I was very fortunate that Linda Montemayor, she was general counsel, and after a successful run at Altice, she was looking for something more entrepreneurial. One of the unfortunate truths is that after we sold to Altice, they went public. They were not a public entity when we sold to them. After we sold to them, they went public at about $30, and I think today the stock was trading at about $4, if I'm not mistaken. So, and that is in part because of economic conditions. It's in part because of some headwinds facing the cable industry. But nonetheless, it has the consequence of anybody in a company with incentive stock grants in the 20s and 30s. when it hits 4 or 5, out of the money, those golden handcuffs that were intended to be retention devices certainly aren't that strong anymore. So, a number of people that went to Altice have since left, and they asked to, come back to work for me, and I said, fine, but we have to respect any non-competes. So my non-compete it ended a couple of years ago, but every individual who wants to make a decision to do that, we have to review their paperwork. They have to review their paperwork, and that's not just from a legal standpoint. It's also from an ethical standpoint. I try to treat everybody the way I'd want to be treated, and if I have an employee who has a non-compete, I would expect them to respect that. So I have to respect that in others.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think, since it's a little bit of a free form conversation we're having here, it walks me into the importance of culture and ethics. I think I have a really strong track record of doing the right thing, and it's something that has served me quite well. And once again, you see the Elizabeth Holmes of the world, and you see the SBFs of the world, and the get rich quick crew. I've been at this 30 years. I've been very, very fortunate. And I don't know if my story is exciting as Elizabeth Holmes, but it's genuine and it's authentic. And I've made a lot of people a lot of money, including investors and my employees. And I take a great amount of pride in the fact that it has been done by the book, so to speak.
Well, you might not be, especially now more than ever, you might not be on the cover of, all the news websites, but I'd rather take your business advice any day than Elizabeth Holmes.
Well, yeah, that's kind of you. And I will confess that in my younger days, when I was first starting out, I cranked the promotional machine about as hard as I could. I got a whole basement full of clippings from Fast Company and Inc. magazine.
Oh, nice.
But I never drank my own Kool-Aid, for lack of a better term. And for anybody out there I'd like today's podcast to bring value to your listeners. And I would recommend, among other books, there's what my friends call an airport business book. It's called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. And I've really become a devotee of that book. And I'm also, I sponsored or underwrote a scholarship in my father's name at James Madison University, where I graduated from, about ethics in business. And this was back when Enron was crashing. That's when I endowed the scholarship. And I just think it's an important subject for entrepreneurs to keep in mind. And it's not talked about very much.
I just had, do you know Mike Crumpet?
Yes, another name.
Yeah, he was the CEO. He started out like CTO into COO, then CEO of CD Now. And
yeah.
He had a bunch of other companies. So he's on my advisory team at Curotech. And I also just did an episode with him as well. It's not aired yet. It'll be aired right before the one with you. Or no, it'll be aired in 2 episodes, and then you'll be 3. But anyway, he talked about the same thing, the importance of company values on culture, but specifically not just stating values like, integrity, we do the right thing or whatever. He said, put the behavior underneath of that. He said, so if your value is integrity, then you could say something like, we won't ever give anybody any deal that we wouldn't take ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, I cannot encourage your audience to I can't encourage them enough to follow this path. And I have been richly rewarded by doing the right thing. So I took one of the first website development companies public in 1999. It was called US Interactive. and we got a 1.2 billion market cap. It was
Wow.
a phenomenal home run. And there were some late in the game, there were some shady things going on. And I called them to the attention of the board, where they said, "Don't be such an altar boy," blah 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 blah. And um, I can tell you, uh, Brian, I to this day don't know if I was fired or if I quit, but it's probably closer to being fired
Is
because
the company still around or no?
now, about 6 months after I left, and this is part of the story, right? The company collapsed, and many of those people who called me an altar boy uh, found themselves on the receiving end of lawsuits for breach of fiduciary obligation.
Mhm.
And the stock went from $100 a share in January to 11 bucks
Wow.
by August.
You said it was a multi-billion-dollar market cap as well.
Yeah, a billion two at its peak to
Wow.
under $100 million. My point is, I quit or got fired. I was offered the office with the window if I just shut up and collected the paycheck, and I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that because I don't agree with what's going on here. By the way, my father was also dying of cancer, and so there was a push pull. But I ended up leaving, and because I made that decision, I wasn't bound to hold the stock or disclose my holdings or disclose any of my activities, as were the other officers. And I ended up getting out and making a lot of money before the thing imploded. Um,
That's karma right there.
that's karma. And people think that I'm this genius market timer. And no, you know what? I just did the right thing, and I went and took care of my dad.
Well, you
And
also had values around the situation and you stood by your values. So, if
yeah,
you didn't know the market was going to collapse, you maybe thought you were losing money and leaving money on the table by selling, but you did it because it was what was right to do for you, at least.
yeah, and it's an example of when you do the right thing, it pays off. And
Yeah.
there's lots of lessons out there that when you don't do the right thing, you can scam your way. So I don't want to be on my soapbox because I'll make a mistake next week and oh, that was the guy talking about ethics and doing it right. But it's really important, and I pride myself on it, and I really encourage you and all of your viewers to have a deep respect for it.
Yeah, good advice for sure. What were some of the things that they were, I mean, if you can get into it, what were some of the things that they were doing on the IPO that had you not feeling, like it was above board?
Well, it was, to be fair, it was before the IPO. We were getting ready to go public, and we had acquired a number of different companies. And I'm not a lawyer, but what I know is that if you're a privately held company, you can basically do whatever you want. Um, and if you're a publicly held company, you can do whatever you want, but you have to disclose it. And what happened is we had acquired a West Coast firm, and one of the principles of the West Coast firm was basically doing business with related parties. So it would be like you having an intellectual mistress and saying, "All right, I'm going to have Curatech do all the work, and I'm going to I'm going to run up a bill of $2 or $3 million with Curatech." Well, if you disclose that as a publicly held company, you're fine. But you can't go public and use that as part of your revenue when you, Brian, control, both the customer and the supplier. And that wasn't disclosed. And as we're getting ready to go public, I'm like, look, guys, I'm too pretty to go to jail, and this is not cool. And they thought that I was quote unquote being an altar boy. Ultimately, I don't know that that was really the result of the unraveling. There was a whole dot-com implosion, but I do think that the absence of the values that we're speaking about in this podcast, the absence of drawing an ethical line, frankly, a lot of people got drunk on the stock price and on their wealth, and made decisions, in my opinion, that they might not have made if it were not so intoxicated, if they weren't so intoxicated by the money.
Well, it's just this, you said the 8 to 10 year cycle. It just happens over and over. This whole crypto thing with Sam Bankman-Fried and the whole FTX. I mean, that's just literally 20 years later, the exact same thing happening all over again.
Yeah, and whether it's Enron or Elizabeth Holmes or FTX, you're telling me there's nobody in the room that has the moral courage to say, "Excuse me, wait a second." You know, so I read today somebody lost $2 million, their life savings on FTX. Is there nobody in the room who's going to stand up and say, "Stop, this is wrong"? I don't know. That groupthink is scary.
Yeah.
Now I'm not saying that everybody's got to be a whistleblower, but where do you draw the line? Where do you say, "Nah, this is not right"?
Yeah, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine over cocktails the other night, and we were talking about why did Google remove the words "don't do evil" from their manifesto, or I think that's what. Yeah, we don't do evil or something like that. They removed that in 2019 or 2020. Uh, Forget who's their current CEO, but whoever is their current CEO removed it, and my theory was that because they're such a large company, they find themselves in situations over and over again where no matter what decision they make, they're in certain specific situations, no matter which decision they make, there's like some element of potential wrongdoing or evil. Like, for instance, government comes in and says like, hey, we need access to all your data. And so, like, what do you do in that situation? Either you comply because they're the government, and they're supposed to have everyone's best interest, but then who knows what's actually happening? And are there malicious people inside of that department that's dealing with the data in a wrong way? Or they say no, and then they protect the user's data, but then they're potentially hurting their country that way. So it's just kind of a theory, but that's I think why they probably took that out, because they have at that scale, a company that size and at that scale with that much power and data, it's kind of like inherent that somewhere somebody's gonna be doing something. But maybe it should have stayed in because it should be a reminder to everybody to make the right decisions. But it was a curious thing to take that out to me.
Well, these are, if they were easy decisions, we wouldn't be talking about them and they wouldn't be hard. I'm reminded of talking to a woman who was in the philanthropic space, and we were talking about child labor. And, it might be our perspective that it's outrageous to have a 10 or 12-year-old child working on an assembly line. But in certain Asian countries, if that child is providing for their family and that is the quote unquote norm for their culture, then should we impose our values there? And, it really gets dicey. I was just having a conversation on the philanthropic front with a food bank, and I don't know if it was a federal grant. I think it was a federal grant to a food bank. And they said that you get this grant, but you can't have, like, let's say more than 10% of the food you serve to the poor consist of flour and sugar. Um,
Mm.
so Tasty Cake wants to deliver a couple truckloads of Tasty Cakes for shut-ins and seniors and the hungry. And this one nonprofit can't accept it because of the conditions of that grant. Well, I don't know, man. In my world, if a kid's hungry or a senior's hungry, Tasty Cake's better than nothing. So
Yeah, but I would agree with that. I mean, I think that's a good thing. I mean, we're debating conditions here, but I think that's a good rule to have. Not
it's
to.
it's well intentioned, okay. And for that matter, it might be of interest to your viewers to know that every company I've started has had the same mission statement. And the mission statement is to be the kind of company that we would like our friends, family, and children to work, right? Because what kind of company do you want your children to work at? You want them to work presumably at a profitable company. You want them to work at an ethical company. You want them to work at a company that has some concern about their community, right? So whether it's online advertising or a car wash or anything else, it's aspirational. I don't know that all of us in any of those companies lived up to that every single day, but it's worth trying.
Yeah, I agree. That's an awesome mission statement, by the way. I really like that one, and that's what was weird to me, because I think the whole Google thing, when I analyzed that, it was curious to me why they would take it out. I think one argument could be, all right, they're so big they can't be perfect, so they can't ever live up to it. But on
Yeah.
the other hand, why not try? And so that was interesting. But there's a good segue there. You brought up the car wash. I was checking out some of the stuff that you're doing on LinkedIn. You've got had the golf club a while back. You've got the car wash business. You talked about a new business you're building. Installing swimming pools, cocktail pools, I think you called it.
Manufacturing swimming pools. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more. You've got a background in tech, obviously, which is why you're on the show. But would love to hear more about what you're doing in the tactile space as well.
So it seems that I make all my money in tech and I lose it all in other businesses. Uh, and there's some amount of humor in that and some amount of truth. The I think coming out of the IPO, I like to say the wealth fairy visited me, and when that happened, I was getting a lot of business plans to be an angel investor, and I was reading the business plans and I didn't understand what they were doing. And this was really peak of the frenzy in 1999, late 1999. And so I said, I want to reinvent myself, and ended up going into philanthropy, and we raised then $600 million for charity. Today, it's about $4 billion. The company that we started was called Giving Capital. And I also I did real estate development in New Jersey, Florida, Costa Rica, and I built a hotel in Canada, in Quebec, which was voted the #1 hotel in the world for quality and value by Expedia. And it was a luxury condominium, and it also bought the golf course at Stone Harbor. And I did think, I guess I had a lack of humility, and I said my entrepreneurial instincts are transferable. And some of them were, but not all of them. And there's a lot to be said for experience. So in the case of this hotel, which was absolutely beautiful, we could never get occupancy up on an annual basis more than about 51% because the resort was seasonal. And we only had 70 rooms, so it was boutique. And, it just couldn't work unless I moved in and was the hotel manager, because you can't amortize a maid and a general manager and all of the resources that are needed when you only amortize them over 70 rooms. But I was romantic about it. I thought, my kids are going to work there one day. I love Mont Tremblant, Quebec. I still do. So it didn't work. I ran it for 5 years, made $5 million on the original sale of the condos, and then gave it all back, running it over 5 years. And it didn't work out. And I actually had a heart attack at one point. In fact, it was September 11th of 2011. It was just too stressful for me. It was.
You had a heart attack doing that project?
I had a heart attack over the stress of this particular situation.
Wow.
Thankfully, I was treated well, and I haven't had any issues since. But it was extremely stressful. And similarly, I bought Stone Harbor Golf Club, and I had, if I had the best timing in the world with the .com craze getting out in 1999, I had the worst timing for Stone Harbor Golf Club, because we bought that in 2007, 2008, right when the economic clouds were gathering again. And so I bought it at the peak. And then the economy fell apart, and it wasn't until just the last few years that housing came back. My plan was to build 400 homes around Stone Harbor Golf Club with a builder, and make it a Florida-like or Arizona-like community at the shore. None of that happened because my timing was off. And, frankly, I also had a partner in the Stone Harbor Golf Club who we didn't see eye to eye. And, I now work with a son who's 28 years old. And if he were on your show, he would tell you that, one of my favorite sayings is there's business risk and there's partner risk. And partner risk is much more difficult to manage than business risk. I've experienced it myself. I've seen it in other companies. And so, if you miss revenue for a quarter, if you have cost control issues, you can deal with a lot of that. When you have a partner wander off the reservation, that's a whole nother kind of problem. And so I'm very, very careful about who I work with now. And Frank, I have the luxury of as I did before, but I just wasn't quite as picky as who I want to work with.
So is it tech companies from here on out for you?
I think so. I don't know that. I don't know how many more I have in me. I'm 62, so I may not be in the fourth quarter, but I'm probably midway through the third quarter.
Yeah.
I'm doing this cocktail pool thing, which is precast concrete pools. I'm doing that with my brother. He's got 40 years experience building pools. So there I've got, the vertical expertise that I didn't have in the hotel. And I have a partner that is absolutely trustworthy. So that checks two boxes. But
well, it's amazing. While we're on that topic, I told you I just did the episode with Mike Krupit, and his the theme for that was his 8 lessons learned from 8 startups. We got to 5 in the hour and 20 minutes or whatever. So we didn't get to all 8. We'll tease the other 3 for later. But I think lesson 3 or 4 was don't try to do a business that you're not an expert in. So he already did, he came from the tech background, did a bunch of tech companies, and then decided to try to start a prepared foods delivery company, and had the same exact story that you just had, where it's, coming from the tech space, understanding that, and, it's best to leverage, your network, your experience, your lessons learned, your, the team that you build up around you, coming from, going from one company to the next. And, you build inertia.
It's unbelievable. The difference between staying in your lane and because your Rolodex is full of contacts that you built for years. And, if I could sell t-shirts that say, stay in your lane, do not make the mistake that I made. I would do so. I get celebrated quite a bit as this successful entrepreneur, and that's nice. It's flattering, but I think the lessons, the positive lessons that I put out there are, be ethical and do the right thing, but also learn from my mistakes. And when I started to build a hotel or buy a golf course, the fact of the matter is I was arrogant. I didn't think I was arrogant then, okay? But looking back, I'm like, so what possessed you to think that, you had enough knowledge to do this? And, it bit me in the hindquarters. So for those of you that are working hard and are soon to have a liquidity event, and you have beer muscles, and, you want to go open a prepared food business or golf course or build a hotel in the mountains of Quebec, or whatever, start small, learn a little bit. Don't go head first in like I did.
Yeah. I've heard that same thing. Tech entrepreneurs starting restaurants for some reason.
Yeah. And I have to admit, I love the intellectual process of creating things. And, it can be, a precast pool that gets dropped in because it's so novel. Nobody's ever done it before, and I love greenfield opportunities. When we did politics online, there was no such thing as a political ad network. There was a gardening ad network, an auto ad network. There was a gay ad network, a women's ad network. Like, there's billions spent on politics, and nobody's doing that. So I like these, open field opportunities where there's not a lot of competition. But yeah, stick to the knitting.
Yeah, I love it. Well, I think we're getting to a good wrapping point here. Is there anything else you want to touch on? Anything you want to plug? Anything we didn't touch on that you hoped we would have?
I think first of all, we should say thank you to the troops serving overseas that are, dialed in to watch this. And thank you for inviting me on. I hope I shared something that's helped somebody out there get a little bit forward in their career, save them a little bit of heartache. Um, I've shared my favorite book, which is The Five Dysfunctions of a Team. And I think we covered a pretty good part of the landscape here. Spend most of my time in Marco Island now. And
how'd you make out with the hurricane?
great, dodge the bullet again.
Oh, good.
And I guess looking back after 30, 35 years of doing this, I see the energy of my son, who's 28, and other young entrepreneurs. And I think I have a different role to play now. You asked me earlier, are there more tech plays? I prefer an advisory role, not necessarily hands-on every day. And the energy and just the tools that like my son uses and is fluent in, I'm not fluent in. So I do feel, as much as it pains me to admit this, I do feel that I'm aging out of the player coach into more of the coach mentality.
Cool. Yeah, I gotta catch up with your son. It's been a while since I talked to him too.
Yeah, it happened very quickly.
Time flies. Well, Rich, thanks for coming on. This was awesome. I think there was a lot of great nuggets from this episode, so I'm excited to get it out there, and I'll let you know as soon as it's up.
All right, good luck, and thank you again.